En garde.
Working with Stanley Kubrick was long, intense, and thoroughly enjoyable. I think every day a treasure. I look back on it now thinking I could do it again, you know, but only with him. I don't think I could take that long with too many directors that I know that well, but I learned a lot. Sometimes it's like getting paid a little bit of money for going back to school working with him because he was so inventive and interesting.
I never realised how much I learned until I lit a film on my own, and then it come back to me, and it like somebody was looking down at me, telling me, that's it, you say, and you should look up like that and think, I remember that, Governor.
People ask if I've worked, if I have the same experience with other directors as I did him. I think not, because there's only one. I always read scripts these days and plant what I think is a visual concept of it. Barry Lyndon, I thought to myself, well, all right, so it's a costume drama. It's been done before, you know. But I know as a fact that nothing they've ever shot in candlelight looked good at that time anyway. And that wasn't easy 45 years ago. The candle gives its own glow. It's a kind of warm, reflected light. Look to the luminosity of it. It was just impossible to shoot.
I mean, the candle stuff was completely different. He'd show me pictures prior to the film and say, this is how we want it to look. You know, oil paintings, and you say, OK, right.
It's not just a question of getting exposure, it's how that exposure relates to the scene. And if it's a kind of phosphorescence look you want to try and achieve, then the lenses are the important thing surrounding it.
Stanley is a photographer at heart. He loves the camera and he always tries to find a different way of making it work. We had found lenses in Germany, made by Zeiss. There are 5 of those lenses. Stanley has 3 of them.
Stanley's the only one I've ever worked with so much control and so much power. He would order stuff and he'd get it straight from the manufacturers. He'd ring up and someone would open the door or lift the phone and it'd be there.
The lenses actually were produced by Zeiss for NASA for very low light, deep space photography. So they were never designed really to be used for cinema, right? So we had to then make them fit a camera of his, which he owns.
The only lens that camera would go onto, of a sound camera anyway, was a type of this BNC. That's the only way we could find it would work, but it meant kind of not destroying the camera so much, but reconstructing it. Because the lens, because of its construction, the rear element is something like 4 millimetres from the film plane. Well, in between those 4 millimetres, there has to be a gate which holds the film in place and a shutter which revolves in between.
So we had to be very close to form the image, so they had to get back into almost the film gate, which is an aperture plate which had to be machined back to receive the lenses so that they could get to the film plane and create a focused image for us, cinematically, you know. And so they were sent away to have that adapted and remounted and blocked by the Ed DeGiulio at Cinema Products. It was very, quite inventive.
Which Stanley paid for himself. I think somebody of Stanley's technical qualities and also knowledge appreciates that sort of thing, because it took quite a while. I think it took something like, possibly could have taken maybe 2 months, 3 months to start that idea off, and there are not many people who have that time to achieve that, you know, that aim of getting something constructed like that, and then even whether it's going to work or not.
Well, when you first see it, you think that's never going to work, but we did so many tests, it had to work. I mean, every night I think Doug shot tests. And every shot we'd done, Stanley used to take a Polaroid. Normal lenses are all, you know, calibrated, where these lenses weren't calibrated at all. Doug had to do everything. He knew so much about the camera and the lenses and different things. And that's what Stanley liked. That's why he had the same people, because they knew it second, it's a second nature.
I mean, Stanley was the quintessential master of lots of things, but he had to iron out a lot of difficulties, like when he orders lenses, which are so fast to shoot with Berlin. The difficulties are maintaining a standard of excellence to keep them user-friendly so that we can get on with the film without having delays with a lot of focus issues,
The lenses, there was no depth of field. Doug had to pull focus on. I mean, if I was sitting in there filming me, you wouldn't like that, he's out of focus.
You can see what you're looking at through the viewfinder, but we couldn't judge the focus. You cannot be answerable to being that accurate without some device. And this device was invented by Stanley. He had a CCT camera. And he thought, if we put it next to the taking camera, but on the side preview, I would know from where I'm sitting, watching the actor, where he's moving forward and where he's going. So Ryan would be doing all this. And every move he had, I made a note on the monitor I had of the picture the CCT camera was giving me, and I put a grid over that and marked off every distance he was seated at. So the amount of movement he could do, I could follow, and so I've nailed him every position I think that he's likely to go to, right? Without him being stuck in a head brace where, looking like some talking puppet. But you have to allow the actors to act and move around. We had no video assist on what we were shooting. This was 40 years ago. Until the laboratory processed the images, the latent images came through and came back that it was okay, all right? With film, you just have to know it's going to be right or wrong. We did have a lot of problems with the candles anyway. The candles would burn down very quickly. We would have to refill every time to the continuity of the... And they give off an enormous amount of smoke as well, atmospheric smoke. So when you got the scene, you would open all the windows, put the plenums on, extract all the dirt and dust and the smell, because people, eats up oxygen.
We had so many candles, I mean, there was no oxygen in the room, suddenly you're falling asleep.
So yes, everything you had to sort of shut down, regroup, and go back to number one and go through the whole process again.
You are sometimes lonely.
Sometimes. The ambient light in the room is everything. Everything falls away too quickly. It's not shape to it. Candlelight don't travel very far. I always say it was an illusion. If you see 5 candles there, you're sold the idea that the light's coming from the candles. And if you look at some of the scenes, how was they so bright in the background? We had a bit of ambience, bounce off a ceiling to bring it up, because the 4 candles or 5 candles you see, behind them were 20 candles in a film can. But you don't see them. You've been sold that idea that the candles are flickering. They are lighting it, but there's a bit of a backup there.
Lou had this idea of putting reflectors to the ceiling of these rather stately homes because people want to burn the place down. There's quite a lot of smoke produced from these candles and a fair amount of heat. You have to be careful. And there was not a set built on that movie. They were all real locations, priceless locations, often open to the public every day. That ambient light was reflected back into the set itself. There's still a semblance of some illumination in the background, so you're still reading the wallpaper, the texture of the door, the paint, the carpets, the ceiling. The whole thing is there recorded at a very low level, but conceivably real enough to believe that it looked real.
Scenes were constructed from paintings. When I say paintings, it's setups. Setups themselves were constructed from paintings or drawings of that period.
He would say, "You see this picture, Lou?" And he said, "That's it." I said, "Well, that's where they should sit. So the light will come from there." And he said, "That's okay. And we'll try that." Lots of the scenes were shot with the source of light coming from the windows.
The whole picture was shot during the winter. Well, that's too short a day, so we would start with the sun, because most buildings that we shot in, they were designed and built in those days that they get the maximum light is shining through the windows. When the light began to fail, then we could switch on our artificial light and continue shooting.
So you cheat the source. You sell the idea of how the light's going to be, and it would look like natural light, but there would be paper frames and mini brutes behind it, so you had a soft light source coming through. Or if you didn't like that, You could take them out, and you had hard lights there as well, and different light source completely. Great big arc lights. So it was never really natural light. It looked like natural light.
Hello.
I see you're alone. Why don't you come over and join me?
Well, thank you, Barry. You're very kind, but I'm expecting someone to join me soon.
I went to the barn where they have the jewel, right? So he said, go and have a look at the barn and see what you think. So I went to the barn, and there's 28 holes in the wall, all round. So he said, what do you think? I said, well, I think behind Ryan is the same both ends, right? And round there were 28 holes, so I said, I'm going to put a light through every window. I split like that. Arc lamp. So you got, if you wanted a shaft of light, you could have it. I was just lucky, you know what I mean? I came up with the right answers. But I think most of the places we went to, that was all right, easy peasy, really. Because Stanley, he understood photography. He had so much camera gear. I mean, John said to me once, Stanley would have made a very good cameraman.
You know, he has a little sort of viewfinder. So the lens you're doing the movie on, for that scene, would be attached to the viewfinder. And then they had the correct format. The ground glass was marked up the same as the taking camera. So basically you were getting the camera positioned exactly. And who would know if it wasn't the same height, but him, he would. He would operate a lot himself. Lyndon, he did most of, I think.
He does a lot when it's handheld. He likes to do it himself because he can see it himself. He can see his results, especially on handheld. The Araflex was designed to hold it a certain way. I mean, that's the way it was designed. But he found a way of holding it, which you might say is a kind of a pre-steady cam, which was much simpler, much easier. And, you know, I mean, there's the only person I've known out of everybody that could operate a camera could hold it as steady as what he could, because of finding another way.
But whether it was because he had an instrument of his own vision plastered so incurably deep that it couldn't be translated to a normal person like myself, it had to fit his mind's view of what he wanted, and this is why he did it himself. It had to be so precise to the meaningfulness of his vision. I think it's extraordinary how that was the case. Stanley had this 20-to-1 zoom lens, which he quite liked to use, which was a 24 to a 48 millimeter, which we used to a large extent on this as these sort of slow, imperceptible moves going backwards and backwards and opening up and opening up. We never used the word zoom. It was varying the focal length, he preferred to call it.
I think it was like a picture within a picture. Every part of the zoom was a picture within itself. The zooms weren't used as zooming and getting from one position to another. Most of them were actual compositions, if one remembers starting on the guns in the jewel down by the water edge. And then if you stop every frame, you'll find every frame is perfectly composed, is a setting within itself. I think it was used that way, not because of a zoom, but to tell a story without cutting, and to make also the flow of the picture, which was a very mellow and soft. Everything was soft.
I could print every frame of that movie, frame them all, and have them in every room of my house. And I still wouldn't get bored of looking at these pictures. It was a delicious feast for each eye, I would say. You can't get enough of it visually. I don't think we could do a Barry Lyndon today. It takes time to work these stuff, you know, properly, to make it cinematically gelled. To excite those silver halide crystals and get these images is something magic to me still. And when you think of a single ray of light, really from the dye of a film, you know, has multitude of colours, many more still than you would get with digital, which are predetermined artificial colours. They're getting there. But the thing about the looks of Barry Lyndon are the tones of the same colour at different levels of the shade of that colour. If you get a green, you've got dozens of different shades. The tapestries of the sets, the costumes, you see were vibrant. Not vivid, not chrome up, contrast down, but were vibrant. They were real. To me, that's a standard example of how we should achieve perfection in cinema.